Morning, Charlie Greenhouse.
Good morning.
How do you feel after your weekend at the 25 Hours of Thunderhill?
Happy and tired, and maybe tired and happy.
Would you mind answering a few questions for our followers, new and old? They've submitted quite a bit, and I figured we could knock some of those out in this video.
Absolutely.
Okay. Number one, could you tell us how much the car weighs?
It's about 1,850 pounds plus or minus. When this car was first built, it was 1,830, and we have some additional equipment in the car, lights, batteries, things that weren't in the car for sprint racing. So it's probably around 1,860 right now.
What kind of chemistry are you using in your batteries?
We've got LFP or lithium ferrous phosphate batteries, and we do that for safety. Their impact, puncture, uh, resistance is much better than a lithium ion pack. It's much more stable chemistry, and with the design of the car, they actually become part of the ballistic impact protection for the driver, because the reactions that would happen in a crash are much milder than any other lithium chemistry, and certainly much milder than any gas.
Okay. Regarding the chassis, what can you tell me about it?
It's a square tubular chassis that is of our own design for the most part. We borrow a lot of suspension and some geometry from an existing car, but as with any race car, you don't reinvent the things out there in the world that are working. You just design it to suit your needs.
Okay. Do you have any horsepower information for us?
We've run the car. Typical horsepower rating on the car is about 180 horsepower. We have what we call party mode, which will bring it up into the low mid 200s. And for this race, obviously range and reducing the number of pit stops was key, so we tuned the car down to about 65-70% of normal. So we're running in the mid 100s, 140 horsepower for the race.
Why don't you want to go faster during this race?
Well, one of the things that I think a lot of people miss in endurance racing is that it's the number of laps and the amount of time. It's not how fast you can go on an individual lap, and if the faster you go, the more energy you use, and as a result, the sooner you'll have to pit. And every time you pit, you are not making miles. So with our car, we were looking at 25 to 30 minute pit stops, which we extended, or 25 to 30 minutes between pit stops, which we extended to almost 40 minutes per stint. And even losing the time that we did by going a little slower to do that, we gain it back easily by not spending our time in the pits.
One viewer has a question. Why was our car being passed by other cars?
Well, because it's a race, and some of those faster cars spent more time in the pits. There's a great example. One of the teams just barely finished the race, but they had to do a motor swap. And if you conserve your car and don't have any problems, it's incredibly effective in an endurance race.
Talk to me about shock load. There's been some questions why the shock load is actually less in the EVSR.
Well, because we don't have a transmission, we don't have clutch. Every time you shift a normal car into a new gear, you dump the clutch, you have a situation where you're introducing a torque load that we don't have. The nature of an EV is that the power delivery is much smoother, it's much more linear, and it's much more controllable. So you're not creating as many abrupt changes in energy, both on and off throttle. And as a result, we have a very, very reliable mechanical system as well as electrical system.
Okay, and our final question for this morning. What's the learning curve for someone driving an EVSR for the first time?
Typical time it takes for somebody to get comfortable in the car is anywhere from about 3 to 5 laps to really learn the car enough to be, for an experienced driver. Within a day, they're up to pace and running. The reality of it is it's just like any other race car, except it's got less to do. You don't have to figure out what the shift points are. You don't have to figure out exactly where the clutch engages. You can spend more time focusing on the drive than the actual car.
What is the hardest thing you think a new driver encounters, or the most different thing that they encounter with EVSR?
The roll center of the car is very low, so it sits flatter than most cars in corners. There's some dynamic things that are different, so learning the limits of the car and learning how the feel of those limits are is a little bit unusual. It's not typical, but it's certainly less of a transition than going from say a Miata to a GT1 tube frame car. It's really not a lot to get used to. It's just hyper focusing on your line, your points, and again, you don't have to figure out new shift points or what your power band is or any of those things. So you're able to focus, you narrow your bandwidth with regard to the car, so you can broaden your bandwidth with regard to the drive.
Well, thank you this morning for answering some questions. Can we check back in with you another time?
After my nap.
How long of a nap do you need after a 25-hour race?
Oh, sometimes it's a week or two.
All right, we'll check in with you sooner, however.
See you soon.
Bye.